When I went to college, there was internet all the time in the dorm. I didn't have a computer though, so I had to go to the computer room to access the internet. But a couple years in, my family pooled together and got me a computer. And being on the net at all times, the net as we called it then.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Manasa and I'm here with another episode of Tech Breakdown. While I was writing the script for this episode, I started wondering if I could remember a time in my life without the internet. I obviously always remember having a computer, even if that meant a really heavy, bulky box. But for better or worse, I didn't really get to be on the internet until I hit teens. I do have vague memories of a little me accompanying my father to internet cafes where he checked emails. But I only got my hands dirty much later. But I do very clearly remember a world without smartphones around me. And now it's a hard feat to find a space that isn't heavily populated with smartphones. All this to say that the digital world has evolved very quickly, abruptly over the last decade or so. And for all that has been done in the name of progress, we find ourselves in a rather grim spot. Turns out the internet was not the great democratic liberator as many hoped it would be. So today we are going to consider this. Can we build a better internet? Is it possible, given the ultra capitalistic world we operate in, where profits before people is the modus operandi? And if it is possible to improve things, how does one even go about doing it? And what does that look like? To consider these questions, I'm joined by Jessica Gonzalez. She wears a lot of hats. Jessica is an attorney as well as an activist. She is the co-CEO of Free Press, a media advocacy organization that looks at causes like having a free and open internet, platform accountability, etc. She is also co-founder of Change the Terms, a coalition that works to tackle the issue of online hate. Welcome, Jessica. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So you advocate for a better media and technological space, whether it be by advocating for leveling access to digital technologies or rallying for the preservation of local journalism, or also fighting against hate and disinformation online. So could you tell us a bit about how you got here? What made you interested in the world of media and technology in the first place?
Sure. Well, I grew up wanting to be a journalist. I carried a little crummy composition book with me everywhere I went and asked friends and neighbors to write in it. I was really interested in whose stories got told. As a Mexican American, I didn't see stories about my community in the news very often, or when I did, they were negative depictions of my community that didn't match my version of reality at all. And so I think that probably informed my desire to do storytelling to help build people's understanding of the world around them and get a better look at neighbors who are different than us. I continued to be interested in this, even though I decided at one point in college, I decided the media system wasn't for me. I was really turned off by the corporatism and the sexism and the racism that I saw in the industry. And I decided I was going to become a lawyer. And fast forward, I found this amazing group of organizations that were working to change the media system to make it more equitable. And in Free Press's case, to really build the type of news and information systems that we need to sustain a never before seen just and multiracial democracy. And so that's why I'm here. And that's what Free Press is working to do.
I'm curious, do you remember your first interactions with the internet? Do you remember what it was like, what your hopes were from this new technology then, and how it has all turned out to be when you look back in retrospect?
Well, you're going to make me date myself with this question, but I kind of love it. So, when I was in high school, a lot of people were getting internet access, but we did not have it at my house. And a friend of mine, I went over to her home one day and we were in a chat room. And the idea that you could connect with this anonymous people across the internet and you didn't know their location was fascinating. We had a lot of fun doing what teenagers do, which was mostly goofing around. But when I went to college, there was internet all the time in the dorm. I didn't have a computer though, so I had to go um, to the computer room to access the internet. But a couple years in, my family pooled together and got me a computer. And being on the net at all times, the net as we called it then, it was just it was addictive at first. It was hard. And we didn't have anywhere near the amount of content that we have on the internet today. But being able to connect and learn across geography, I think tapped into my fascination with learning more about the world around us and um, connecting with people across difference, which is partly why it's so sad to see what's happening to the internet today. Instead of having systems that help us connect and understand across difference, we have systems that are built and feed off division. And so I think it's part of what fueled me to do the kind of work that I do.
I'm going to throw you in the deep end now and ask
Jeez.
you a really broad question. And so, what does an ideal internet or online world look like to you?
Yeah. It's hard. I think there's no ideal world. There's an ideal world of what the internet looks like for me, and it's really different than what my neighbor's vision of an internet might look like. But I think at the end of the day, an internet that is informed by community and by serving the needs of real people and putting people over profits and really having a space where we can connect and learn and help understand about the world around us, to be entertained, to be educated, to connect to opportunity, and to have equity. And this is really key because a lot of my story is about what I didn't have, right? Everyone had internet at home except for me. I got to school, there was internet, but I didn't have a computer. That was a number of years ago. I won't say the number, but it was a lot. We still have those same inequities today. We have lack of access. We have a lack of affordability for just basic internet access. So before we can even get to the problems of Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, we have a problem that a large portion of our society, predominantly poor folks in our society, don't have equal access. And so ensuring that everyone has equal access is important. But once you get online, what we also find is, although there is a robust exchange of ideas, that exchange of ideas is not equal to all as well, because we see that women and people of color and LGBTQ folks and other, religious minorities, people who come from minority backgrounds, are often shouted down or harassed or silenced simply for speaking our minds, simply for being who we are. And that is not an ideal internet. What we want is an internet where people can show up and be who they are and have the same access to ideas, to sharing their ideas, but also to gathering news and information. And the barrier shouldn't be, right, that we are harassed or threatened for simply existing.
I mean, you briefly touched upon the notion of inequity when it comes to the internet. A lot of your work, in a lot of your work, you make the point that the internet is not internet for all. I mean, there is a third of the world that's not connected to the internet still. Why do you think that is a problem, and what do you think are the solutions, especially with regard to your experience working on it at Free Press?
I think it's a problem to the extent that so much is happening online. So many services are online only. So many, whole databases, whole fountains of knowledge are being uploaded to the internet, and job opportunities, educational opportunities. Even in the United States, for instance, our social services in many parts of the states are not available unless you can access the internet. And so it's a problem because opportunity has migrated online. And sometimes those same opportunities are not available in real life. And so I would argue, just as we wouldn't assume that we can send kids to school and not provide textbooks or paper or pencils for them to do their schoolwork, we can't expect, we can't provide basic human rights like education and speech to only those who are online. We either need to provide those in a different forum, or we need to ensure that everyone has access to the internet. And we failed to do that as a society almost across the board. We have not gotten um, all of our neighbors online. And so that's critically important, not just because people are engaging in democracy online or getting news and information and access to resources to meet their basic needs. It's also a problem because as AI systems get built, they're built on a faulty data set that skews wealthy. They're built on a faulty data set that doesn't include 1/3 of the world, right? And that is predominantly, it skews English, it skews wealthy, it skews white. And so we have to, if we're going to assume that we can build AI tools and other tech tools that serve the global majority, then we have to make sure that everyone is online.
What do you think are the solutions, and how does that one go about doing that?
The first is in our minds. We cannot assume that industry and capitalism are going to get us what we need here. I think in terms of news and information, for instance, we've seen journalism slide, we've seen newsroom layoffs globally, and it's because the old model of funding journalism it's not going to sustain the amount of quality news and information that we need to support democracy worldwide. We actually need to subsidize journalism because it's a public good that serves people and it beyond whatever commodity it has to businesses. And so that's first and foremost. I think in the internet realm, we shouldn't assume that internet companies are going to build affordable access to places that are hard to reach. They're going to build access in places where they can make money. So we have a market failure there, and we can't depend on markets to build internet. We actually have to understand that the internet is more valuable to everyone when all of us are on. And that's something that many countries have done, right? We have a universal service program, for instance, for telephone service here in the United States. At one point, we had telephone access reaching 99%. And that was funded off taxpayer money because we understood, or I understood, for instance, that the phone network is less valuable to me if my grandmother who's in a rural area isn't connected to it, right? And so we said, it is a public good to have phone service. I would argue the same is true now for the internet. It's more valuable if hard to reach places are also connected, because that is going to build the depth of knowledge and connectivity that we can have. But we can't rely on the marketplace to get us there. And then the same is true with these internet platforms that provide us news and information and education, but also entertainment like Facebook and Twitter. We know that they are going to have a race to the bottom when it comes to what kind of content they are going to promote. We know that they are selling our eyeballs to advertisers. So the more time that we spend on TikTok, scrolling through video, the more TikTok can sell our attention to the advertisers that advertise on that platform. That means that they are going to continue, and their algorithms will continue to serve us the type of content that keeps us glued, even if that content is hateful, even if it is inaccurate, even if it is spreading dangerous conspiracy theories and violence. We know that it is not in their interest to filter that information so that we get quality news and information and entertainment. We are failing and we are at risk. And that's why we see democracies around the world, including the United States, and we think we're invincible and we think we're great, but we're not. We are just as susceptible as everyone else to crumbling democracy. And we saw that on January 6th at the US Capitol. We saw that lies that were seeded by Donald Trump and amplified by platforms and by Fox News and other news outlets led to a violent attack on our capital that was meant to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. That's core and fundamental to democracies. So, do we want peaceful transfers of power or do we want chaos and violence? I want a peaceful transfer. That's why I do this work. I don't think we have the media system that we need to support that at this time. That scares me. I'm terrified. And I don't mean that we can't have dissent. I don't mean that we can't have people who are liars in our media system. That's fine. There's always been liars. But we need to have a media system that is able to call that out and not amplify it in this sort of unhinged, biased way.
You've sort of led nicely into my next question. It was about hate speech and about mis and disinformation and the use of these platforms to subvert democracy. And you talked about the capital rights in the US. And among other platforms, you have continually pressed, for example, Facebook to improve its guidelines in terms of service and also properly enforce these measures. But we've continually seen a lot of failures, including on January 6th. Has there been any success? Has Facebook ever listened? And what do you think can be done about it?
Has Facebook ever listened? I don't know. I mean, Facebook listens when we make it hurt. And that's what we saw with the Stop Hate for Profit campaign that I led with some partners at ADL and Color of Change and NAACP and a few more. We were able to show advertisers that Facebook had not significantly invested in reducing hate and lies on the platform. This was ahead of the 2020 election. We got 1,100 some odd advertisers to boycott Facebook in the month of July. Facebook deplatformed QAnon in that instance, which was a hugely important move because QAnon was one of the biggest election denialism spreaders in the US. Do I think Facebook would have done that, but for major pressure? No. I think we've seen Facebook and other platforms engage in what I'd call an appeasement strategy from day one. They will meet with us. They will pretend to listen up and down the ranks. We've met with Mark Zuckerberg. We've met with Sheryl Sandberg. We've met all the way up and down the ranks there. We've pointed out problems. We've had individuals deplatformed for being prolific spreaders of hate and lies. And so they're not bad at taking down an account or two if you point out that it's violating the rules. But we've seen widespread failure to enforce rules that are on the books. Some of their rules actually look pretty good, but the problem is they're not enforcing them. And Free Press did a report last year called Empty Promises. And it essentially showed how Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube failed across the board to properly enforce even the rules that they have on the books, which aren't as good as we think they ought to be. I mean, will they listen? It depends. I mean, I am worried about the political space that Elon Musk is creating for Mark Zuckerberg and others like him to roll back protections. We just saw Facebook, for instance, say that it's now going to allow big lie content on the platform. We've seen YouTube do the same. We've seen across the board layoffs at tech that impact content moderation workforces. And so it's hard to imagine that AI alone can make up for those losses because content moderation is so contextual, and it's contextual for a specific geography or social paradigm that we can't, like, the robots alone cannot save us here. We're not at that place. It's not that I don't think we need and that there ought to be AI enforcement of content rules. I just simply don't think it's enough. And we saw this last year and the year before across language, where we did see actual better enforcement against English language content that violated Facebook's rules. But when my team was looking at Spanish in particular, because we have a lot of Spanish speakers on our team, and we saw the same exact kind of content that was getting taken down in English was being left up for days or even weeks in Spanish. And we pointed this out to them, and the response was so lackluster and disappointing that we started this campaign called Ya Basta Facebook that was pointing out the disparities. We did see, I think, an effort ahead of the 2022 election in the US to start better moderating content in Spanish and having more information out there about the level of disinformation. But the amount of advocacy and pushing that we had to do to get there was really, really tough. And I still think if you looked across the board, again, especially at languages that are even less prominent than Spanish, you'll see a huge drop off in content moderation across language. And this is what the activists in Myanmar were pointing out as well, right? That there was not appropriate mechanisms in place to enforce the rules, and it contributed to the genocide.
Mhm. So I guess the main problem then is that everything's market driven, right? It's the business model that drives Facebook, that drives these big tech companies. So what you are essentially saying is any effective solution would need to target that market component, for instance, for to push for change, because you go to stakeholders and you point out harms, and so that's how you'd have to do it. But I mean, you seem more optimistic than me, but do you think that in a space where these companies still operate in a really hyper capitalistic setup, where so much of power is concentrated in the hands of a few tech companies, would advocacy and any amount of regulation really ever be enough?
Mm. It's a good question. And I think your premise that you started out with is right. We can't rely on capitalism to get this right. Okay, so I'm a lawyer, right? And I lawyer in the public interest now. But if I was a lawyer for Facebook, I would advise them to serve their shareholders, because they actually have a legal duty to do that. And so not only is it not in their market interest, they have a legal duty that ties them and binds them to making more money, no matter what the harm. And so I do believe in that regulation, and that changing the market dynamic can have an impact. Is it everything we need? No, but we can have a separate conversation about capitalism and whether or not it's good for society on another day. But I do think that regulation works. One of the big regulatory regimes that we're pushing in the US is data privacy and civil rights legislation that actually minimizes the amount of data that these companies can collect on us. And the reason I think this is important and foundational even is because a lot of the abuses, a lot of the ways that they try to keep our eyeballs glued to the screen to monetize our attention is by knowing every little detail about our lives, what we like, what we don't like, what makes us angry, what makes us joyful, and then gearing algorithms with the kind of content that keep us glued to the screens. And so privacy and privacy regulation and minimizing data collection isn't just about protecting our privacy rights, which are important, inherently important. It's also about making it harder for them to manipulate us using our own data. But also, it's critically important that we be able to control our own data and how it's used. Our data shouldn't be allowed to be used to criminalize us, to surveil us, to invade and intrude onto our daily lives. And so this data minimization serves a lot of purposes. As part of this comprehensive bill called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act that has yet to be introduced this Congress, but was voted out of a House committee last year, there's also a really comprehensive set of civil rights protections that would enshrine civil rights law into the digital square. And so, it would prevent discriminatory use of our financial information, of our health information, of our location data in ways that discriminate based on gender or based on race and ethnicity. And so that's critically important as well, so that we can have free movement of our bodies across space, so that we can migrate, so that we can seek the kind of healthcare, including reproductive healthcare, that we need, I'm sure if you talk to any American right now, there's a lot of us who are really concerned about the state of abortion rights and the ability of these companies to intrude into our private data to prosecute us for our right to choose is critically important right now. And it's part of the erosion of democracy when we're taking away choices like that. And there is a role for regulation to play in helping keep private data private. So you're right. I am an optimist. You can't be an activist without being an optimist. But I don't think this is going to happen overnight. Part of what keeps me optimistic is I know that we're building a blueprint for the future. And I know that we're going to have to hand off the blueprint to the next generation, and that they're going to improve the blueprint and make it better and make it converse with the realities of the day that they're serving in. But this is long-term work. This is long-term work. And we have to build not just, laws, but we have to build public understanding of what's happening. We have to shine a light on the disparities and the inequities and the way tech companies are pushing those inequities. But we also have to understand that tech came to an inequitable society. Like, disinformation is not a new phenomenon. In fact, we have a project at Free Press called Media 2070, and they wrote a beautiful essay about disinformation, essentially, and how since the beginning of the United States, since the founding, we've been a disinformation society. That's the way that white slave owners justified owning slaves. It's the way that people, pioneers justified taking land from Native Americans. We have always been a society that uses news and information to justify bad behavior. And so if we can deepen that understanding across our society, we can have a more common ground to find solutions. The problem is, while we're trying to build a more just society, we have people trying to ban books. And that's what we're up against. And so unfortunately, we have to engage in activism that educates and that makes interesting the real history of what has happened in our various geographies. Because otherwise, we're standing up against centuries of disinformation that is tough to surmount. But I believe that we can and that we will win. And I believe that there are tons of smart people who care about democracy who are working on this. And I get my motivation every day from those people, including the Real Facebook Oversight Board members who are just so inspiring and amazing. And we're building the knowledge base. And that's why I got into public campaigning, frankly. I mean, I was a lawyer. I intended to fix things through the law. And it was an education to me when I realized we cannot fix everything through the law because we have a fundamental misunderstanding about what the problems are based on our, and the fact that people of color have a different understanding from white people almost across the board, not entirely, of what are the major problems facing our society, tells you everything you need to know about the information gaps that we need to fill so that we can better understand what's happening with each other.
This is going to be my final question, and I asked you before what an ideal internet space looks like to you, and I do know the answer, but do you think it is possible to build that better internet that looks more like the ideal, especially given the rise of AI and how it has potentially exacerbate current problems and possibly also give us new ones to deal with?
Sure, it's possible. Of course. Do we have the will? Do we have the courage? We, the robots have not taken over. We, the people, have to show whether we have the guts and the will. And these tech barons need to be held accountable. They need to be held accountable by governments and by the people. We need to build the awareness. But of course, we can build this. It's possible. You didn't ask me if it was probable, but it all depends on whether important actors have the courage to put people first, to put democracy first, to put humanity first. It's all possible. We can control what happens here. It's a choose your own adventure situation. We
So,
haven't been making the right choices yet, and we're going to have to abruptly about face if we're going to set this on the right path. And I think that's what we're all trying to do here.
so I'm going to say the takeaway to going about that would be law, but more importantly, journalism and education, as you pointed out, and also somehow of putting pressure on big tech to take action. Did I sum it up okay? Maybe
I think
you
that's
should
right.
have a
Yeah,
go.
it's the people, it's public awareness, it's journalism, and it's getting the details right. I think part of the problem that we're facing in this field is a lot of people understand that we have a problem, and we have to be surgical in what our solutions are. And we've kind of gotten away from that. We can't just demonopolize big tech and expect everything to be okay in the world. We're still going to have tiny companies that invade our privacy that wouldn't be considered monopolies, right? We're still going to have companies that exploit us, that commit fraud, that commit abuse, that perpetuate anti-democratic ideals. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what the solutions are, and we have to work together. But I think you're right. At the end of the day, public attention so that people understand. I mean, I remember in 2020 when all of a sudden it seemed like Carol was already covering these issues and played a critically important role in unveiling the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But in 2020, journalism came to play for the first time across the board, where I felt like this is a robust deepening of the public understanding of what's happening with tech companies. We have to continue to dig. We have to continue to be thoughtful, and we have to continue to help educate communities, because at the end of the day, it's the people who are going to hold hold the companies accountable, but who are also going to hold our elected officials accountable when they are not serving us and meeting our needs.
Thank you, Jessica. This was such a brilliant conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.